Soon, he will complete his work. Tonight, as the sun sets on London one last time, he will unleash his demonic brood onto the streets. And should no one stop him, this city will be consumed by a horde of nightmare creatures.
For a certain kind of horror fan, Nightmare Creatures is more than just a PlayStation game. It's a memory. Foggy, maybe, but unforgettable. The kind you didn't know you missed until you saw it again. It has this early 3D grit look to it, and these amazing monster designs, and a combat system that does way more than you'd expect from a horror game in '97. If you were there for it, you probably remember, and if you weren't, let me show you why it mattered. Welcome to Jake's Save Room, where we preserve gaming's lost stories, and today we're heading back to the horror shelf, for maybe one of the best horror games on the PlayStation 1. Nightmare Creatures was released in 1997 for the PlayStation, PC, and on the N64. It was developed by Callisto Entertainment, a French studio that used its own 3D engine to build the game, something pretty rare for the time. And the team actually based the environments on real 19th century maps and architecture, which really kind of helps explain how it nails that old crumbling London vibe. The story takes place in 1834, but it starts long before that, with a cult called the Brotherhood of Hecate. Back in 1666, they were running occult experiments under the city, trying to create an army of superhumans. What they made instead was monsters, mutated, violent, and impossible to control. One of their own turned on them, and the fire that followed became the Great Fire of London. We then fast forward nearly 2 centuries, and history is repeating itself. London's filled with reports of strange creatures in the streets, corpses rising from their graves, and people changing into something else. And at the center of all of it is Adam Crowley, a mad scientist tied to the Brotherhood who's picked up where they left off. You play as either Ignatius, an occult scholar and priest, or Nadia, the daughter of a doctor who got pulled into this mess and didn't make it out. And together, they try to track Crowley down and stop the spread of whatever it is that's crawling all over the city. Nightmare Creatures plays like a traditional action horror game. There's tank controls, somewhat fixed camera angles, they're kind of clunky at times, and combat that's a little more involved than you'd expect. In the lower left of the screen, you'll see the health bar. It shows as red, and when all that red's gone, you're dead. You can refill it with healing items, these small healing balls, that restore about 1/3, and these larger ones that will refill it completely. And right above that is a second meter, a vertical blue one. That's your adrenaline. And it's not just for show. If this runs out, you start losing health automatically. In the game's world, adrenaline acts as a kind of natural antidote to Crowley's virus. So it becomes a pressure system. You've got to keep moving, keep killing, because the only way to refill the adrenaline is to take out the enemies. The meter drains faster as you go, so pacing and aggression become part of the survival. It's also the closest thing the game has to a timer. There's no on-screen countdown rushing you forward, but this meter fills that role in a more organic, tense way. The game wants you to explore. It hides useful items all over the place, but if you wander too far off course, that adrenaline starts to bleed out. And when it's empty, the game punishes you fast. If you miss a switch, clear out all the enemies in the area, and suddenly you're racing to figure out what you missed before the meter kills you. Some enemies make that even trickier. Zombies, for example, they only stay dead if you cut them in half. Otherwise, they'll just get back up. I found myself leaving one laying around on purpose, just in case I needed a last-minute adrenaline boost. It creates this constant tug-of-war between exploration and survival, where every decision has weight, and that's where the Bloodborne comparisons really start to feel earned. The combat, the urgency, the way the game forces you to stay on the offensive, it really does feel like a PS1 prototype of what a Souls game would eventually become. And the combat itself has some depth. You lock on automatically when you're near an enemy, and you can dodge left, right, or hop backwards. You can also block, and you'll want to. Every enemy has their own attack pattern, and learning them is key to surviving the tougher stages. You start with 2 basic 3-hit combos, but as you progress, you'll unlock more. And they actually matter. Certain combos deal more damage, while others leave you vulnerable and the enemy's blocking. Knowing which combos to use and when is a big part of mastering the late game. There's 3 weapon upgrades you can find throughout the game. You don't level up in the traditional sense, but it does feel like you get stronger as you learn to use your tools better. With the right upgrades and a good handle on your combos, you can carve through fights that would have stomped you earlier. if you're enjoying this trip back on the PS1, don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got more Lost Horror gems coming soon, and every Saturday there's something new waiting here in Jake's save room. But until then, let's get into the crazy items this game has to offer. You'll come across a bunch of items during the game, some dropped by enemies and others tucked away in corners if you're paying attention. And for a horror title, the selection is surprisingly creative. You have your basic healing orbs, of course, and like I've said, small ones refill a chunk of your health and the large ones completely fill it. But they get a lot weirder. The Berserker power-up is easily one of the most fun. It amps up your melee so your strikes slice clean through most of the enemies. And in a crowd, it turns you into a walking blender essentially. And then there's the standard gun and a multi-gun. The latter fires in both directions and it can clear a room fast. But you'll want to save the single shotgun for things like blowing up barrels, because you'll need those to help blow up walls, for hidden paths, or take out some enemies. There's Chaos, and that's a more rare one. It makes enemies attack each other, ignoring you completely. You don't get many of these, but when it works, it's really fun to watch. And then there's the Hearts, another more traditional item. Every time you pick one up, it's just an extra life, so if you die, you can pop the heart and come back to life. But if you run out of hearts and you die, you have to restart the level completely. But what really stuck with me with all this is the dismemberment. You can completely tear off limbs, heads, even cut enemies clean in half. And it's not just flashy, it's functional. Like I've said, the zombies only stay down if you split them in half. Once you beat the game, you unlock Monster Mode, a bonus that lets you replay the campaign while controlling one of Crowley's creatures instead of the main characters. You don't get to choose which monster you play as, the game assigns you one per level, and it shifts from stage to stage. Each has its own movement and attacks, so it's a fun way to shake up the combat. During boss fights, it does temporarily switch you back to a human, but if you don't want to wait, there's also a cheat to unlock the mode early. It's not balanced or game-changing, but it's a cool reward that fits the game's weird, gnarly tone. And the thing is, this system actually works. Nightmare Creatures doesn't play smooth, it's clunky, stiff, and unforgiving. But there's a weird charm to how it all comes together. The adrenaline meter forces you to stay sharp, the combos reward practice, the dismemberment gives every fight a little more impact, and the item variety, even if some are throwaways, helps you feel like you've got tools to work with. It's not perfect, and it's definitely not for everybody, but if you can lock into its rhythm, there's a real game here, one that rewards smart exploration, aggressive timing, and maybe a little bit of desperation. The creature design in Nightmare Creatures is a lot of heavy lifting. Since the story mostly stays out of your way, the enemies become the mood, and they do leave an impression. Some of them are just plain cool. The Pepe's monsters tower over you with 3 arms and 3 heads, lumbering around like they're barely holding themselves together. And the Thames monsters are straight up Lovecraftian, tentacled horrors lurking near the water. These are some of the enemies that are best dealt with the single-shot pistol. Then you've got the faceless men and the giant spiders, who just feel right. Like the kind of things you'd expect to find crawling out of the corners in this game. Not every design hits though. The Dockers are a bit bulky and don't offer much challenge beyond soaking up hits. And the Gargoyles' hit patterns are just plain frustrating. But all of them serve the tone. They aren't just damage sponges. They're expressions of the city's rot. Misshapen, mean, and just memorable enough to stick with you. Even though Nightmare Creatures doesn't spend much time on the plot, it still manages to feel thick with atmosphere. It's the kind of game where the setting tells you everything. The streets of 1800s London are fog-choked, crumbling, and weirdly alive. There's a sense of constant pressure, whether it's the draining adrenaline meter, the aggressive enemy spawns, or just the feeling that this city wants you to stay lost in it. And it leans hard into grotesque. Full dismemberment was rare on consoles back then. Watching enemies lose arms, legs, heads, even torsos add this raw, weighty violence to everything. It's not flashy, it's crunchy, awkward, sometimes messy. But that mess is part of the tone. It feels wrong in a way that works. And the camera plays into this too. It's fixed, but not in the clean cinematic way you'd see in something like Resident Evil. Here, the camera feels kinda unstable, angled in weird ways sometimes, pulling your view too far back or too tight at just the wrong moment. And while that sounds like a flaw, it kind of adds to the discomfort. You're not meant to feel in control, you're meant to feel overwhelmed. It's not a horror game built on fear, it's built on dread and momentum. You're constantly pushed to stay alive. It's like the game wants you panicked, not scared, but strained. You're not solving a mystery, you're surviving a bad night that won't end. And this game gets a lot of Bloodborne comparisons, and they aren't just for show. Both games live in rot and decay, in places where the monsters aren't out of place because everything feels cursed. Nightmare Creatures isn't as polished or deep, but it absolutely nails that same feeling. That vibe that you're too late to stop whatever went wrong here, and all you can do is push through it. And one of the more overlooked parts, but easily one of the most memorable, I feel, is the sound design. The game doesn't bombard you with constant noise, it waits. Most areas lean into silence, broken only by your footsteps and the distant groans of something not quite human. But there's this eerie stillness between fights that make every little scrape or growl stand out. It's the kind of ambient design that makes even empty alleys feel dangerous. But when the soundtrack does come in, it hits really hard. The organs are the backbone of it all, giving the game this gothic, almost religious undertone. They make it feel like you're fighting your way through something ancient and cursed, not just diseased. These aren't monsters from a lab, they feel biblical, like plagues wearing flesh. Organs get drowned out by gritty guitar riffs, and the music turns violent, almost metal. It doesn't sound like a traditional horror score. It sounds like a game that wants you fired up. It wants you to survive, but not cleanly. These fights feel brutal because the music makes them feel earned. It's rare to hear a horror game use its score like this, to escalate tension and aggression at the same time, but it works. There's a reason people still listen to this soundtrack decades later. It's not just nostalgia, it's because the music has identity. Whether it's the industrial hum in the background or the way the strings swell right before a swarm ambushes you. The sound design here doesn't just serve the gameplay, it elevates it. It's not clean and it's not subtle, but it's perfect for this world. When Nightmare Creatures launched in 1997, it actually did land pretty hard. It sold over 1.5 million copies by early 2000, more than most people realize, and for a brief moment, it looked like the start of something. A gritty new horror series with sharp claws and room to grow. Critics were kind of mixed here and there. Some knocked the difficulty, others praised the atmosphere. But numbers don't lie. Nightmare Creatures was a hit. It found its audience fast, and especially with players who were hungry for something darker and bloodier and more aggressive than Resident Evil was offering. It didn't just echo the gothic horror for the PS1 era, it leaned into it hard. The fog-drenched streets, twitchy combat, and creatures that felt raw and feral instead of scripted. And even now, it's a game people remember. The organ-heavy soundtrack, the boss themes that veer into full-blown metal riffs. You still find folks online talking about how they revisit the music years later. It stuck with them, not because it was polished, but because it was striking. A sequel followed, but it didn't carry the same energy, and plans for a full reboot eventually fell through. The series went quiet, even though its DNA still shows up in later games. When people compare this to Bloodborne, it's not just the setting, it's the shared momentum, aggressive fighting, pulsing tension, and cities that seem to rot from the inside out. So yeah, Nightmare Creatures didn't disappear because no one cared. It just faded with time. But if you look back, you can still see the trail left behind. Blurry in the fog, but it carved deep enough to matter. Nightmare Creatures isn't a polished game. The controls can be stiff, the camera fights you in tight spaces, and some of the later levels feel like they drag. But underneath all that, there's something really striking here. It doesn't play it safe. It's raw, fast, and unforgiving in a way that most horror games weren't at the time. And that makes it stand out. What hits hardest now is just how much identity the game has. It's not borrowing someone else's blueprint. It's making its own. The enemy designs are genuinely grotesque, full-on dismemberment, limbs flying off mid-fight in a world that feels like it's falling apart in real time. The soundtrack blends gothic organs with distorted metal riffs, and it works. The boss themes alone are still talked about today by players who grew up with the game. The adrenaline mechanic is maybe its boldest idea. It acts like a silent timer, constantly pushing you to stay aggressive. You want to explore, but if you take too long, you start dying. It's a system that forces momentum, tension, and decision-making, and it adds more pressure than any clock ever could. The fact that zombies only die if you slice them in half, that's just the cherry on top. You're not surviving just by hiding, you're surviving by learning. You have to get better, and that's something modern players can still connect with. It may not be a masterpiece, but it doesn't have to be. Nightmare Creatures is more than just a curiosity. It's a glimpse at something ahead of its time. It sold over 1.5 million copies for a reason. People remember it. And if you give it the time, you might just see why. And that's Nightmare Creatures, a weird, grimy little PS1 horror game that still sticks with people all these years later. And if you played it, I'd love to hear what you remember. If you haven't, maybe now's the time you walk through Crowley's London yourself. If you enjoyed this one, consider dropping me a sub. I cover all kinds of overlooked, forgotten, or just plain strange horror games. And there's a lot more coming. Drop me a comment, tell me what horror game stuck with you. And if you want more, check out the playlist on the screen, and whatever other video YouTube is suggesting you. But thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see y'all later.